everybody, welcome back to another Sewcialites 3 video. Today we're going to sew up block number 13. It's called the back porch block. This block is designed by Joanna Figueroa of Fig Tree and Company. This is a great example of a block that looks really difficult, but it's not. We're going to be working with techniques that we've already done throughout this sew along to complete this block. This is my first Sewcialites video in the new room. I'm still working on making sure I get sound and lighting correct, and this one's being posted a day late. Sorry about that. There's been a lot going on. I'm going to sew the 9-inch block on camera, and then the 6-inch block off camera. I'll show you both at the end. I still haven't fixed my printer, so the color's a little bit off. I always use sticky notes when I'm cutting my fabric to make sure that I don't cut the wrong size. For the 9-inch block, I made mine a little bit different than as pictured. I have square E in the center, the same color as the C squares out on the corner, and that's because I'm working with a couple of fabric lines that are limited on color. I'm using the Little Sweetheart fabric line and Cloud 9 fabric line by Laundry Basket Quilts. It's pinks, reds, creams, and there's some tan. And then the 6-inch block I made with the different colors. I'm sewing that up in Strawberry Lemonade, and I'll show that to you at the end. Let's get started with the 9-inch block. You want to do all your cutting first, really straightforward. Instead of laying mine out with the little letters with my alphabetties, I laid mine out how I want the block to look. That also helps give me an idea of whether I think I need to change any of the fabrics. The 4 corners and the center is square and a square. One thing you can do to make this go faster is prep all of the like things together. We've done that before on some of the blocks. If you're drawing lines, you need to draw lines corner to corner on the back of fabric B and fabric F squares. I'm going to be using the diagonal seam tape. I've showed that before. I was going to draw lines, but I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure where my friction pens are right now, so we'll use the diagonal seam tape today. You can only do 2 corners at a time because they're going to overlap. So you want to do 2 opposing corners and add some pins. To save time, I went ahead and pinned all my corners. These are the 4 corners. They're ready to go. And then I also did the center. So I have all of these ready to sew at the same time. Next, I'm going to pin all my rectangles together. Right sides together, add a couple pins. I'll pin them all. I have all of these ready to go. We're going to head over to the machine. I'm on my 1955 Singer 221 featherweight. I have my regular foot on with no guide and the diagonal seam tape. I've gone over how to use that before. Let's go ahead and sew our blocks. I'm going to start with the square and a square units since I have the foot on with no guide. I'm going to use my diagonal seam tape, put the foot down. I'm going to hand crank the needle down. Make sure I'm getting it where it needs to go. And then I need to line this up with the red. Let's go ahead and sew. I've got all of those sewn. What I'll do is separate them all because I chain pieced everything together. And then you can take out your pins, and before you cut off the corners, you can check everything. So you can take a corner, flip it up, look at it. That looks good. If it's really crooked, you'll want to seam rip and do that again. Once you know your corner looks good, you can go ahead and trim a 1/4 inch away from that seam, and then take it over to the iron and press out. So I'm going to do that for all 5 of my squares. Since these squares aren't that big, I'm going to use my big pair of scissors here and just trim about a 1/4 inch away. This will go faster than going over to the cutting table, lining up my ruler, checking to make sure I've got that 1/4 inch seam, and then trimming. I've got all of these pressed. You might notice my hands are on a different side. I can work on either side of the table in here, so rather than walk around the table, I can just stand on the other side. If your center square is the same as your corner squares like mine, and only the outside squares are different, make sure when you pin your next 2 squares, you pick up the right fabric. You don't want to have this and then accidentally put these on. I need to pin my next squares. I've got all of these pinned and ready to sew, so we're going to do the same thing, corner to corner, and then you can flip them all and check, make sure they look good before you cut off the extra. Let's go ahead and sew these. While I'm here at the machine, I'm going to go ahead and switch to the 1/4 inch guide foot and sew my rectangles. I'll need this foot for the rest of the block assembly. Let's go ahead and sew the rectangles. Now I can cut all of these apart, take out the pins, check them, trim and press, just like we did for the first 2 corners. And then these are ready to press. When you go to press your rectangles, it has you pressing the seam open. That seam is going to bump up against your square in a square. So if you'd prefer to press to the dark, that's okay too. That's what I like to do, is press to the dark side. I've got all my pieces pressed. You can look at the pattern, and I'm making the 9-inch block. My square in a square block should measure 3.5 inches square for the corner blocks and the center block, and 3.5 inch square for the rectangle blocks. Got a 3.5 inch square ruler. I can double check everything. Probably going to be pretty close, but crooked. I can even see this one here is crooked. Yep, it's crooked. That's okay. This is nice and straight. This is nice and straight. This is nice and straight. The part that's crooked is really easy to see. I'm not worried about it. If you've watched any of my videos, you know that I don't worry about things being perfect. This one, it's kind of the same thing when you look at it. If it's crooked, you can usually spot it right there. So what I'm going to do is just be careful when I'm putting these together. And then you can also double check your rectangle blocks. They should also be 3.5 inches square. These look pretty good. Let's go ahead and lay out our block for assembly. Keep your picture nearby. This is a good reminder, especially for color placement for the rectangles. I'm going to start with my center square in a square, which you can see is crooked. I'll just do the best that I can when I assemble this. The rectangles are nice and straight, so when I go to sew things together, I can line it up like that. I know this part's straight, this part's crooked, and you can see the background here from the rectangle. But when you're done, when you put it together like that, you'll end up with a straight seam. Another thing to remember, which sometimes I forget when I do this, is when you're sewing these together, watch for that intersection. If you sew this side up, you can make sure that as you're sewing this seam, you cross right here, right where these threads cross. Then when you press your block, you'll have your corner just right. Sometimes I forget, and I'll pin and I'll sew on this side, and then I'll press and I'll realize that I accidentally cut off the corner. So if that's really important to you, when you're sewing anything like this, half square triangles, square to square, flying geese, that have the cross on the back with the seams, sew with that side up, and you can keep an eye on your corner. So I've got that, and then I've got these. Gives you an idea of what the block is going to look like. I'm going to sew like this, but when I go to sew these, this side up, I'm going to head right over to my machine and sew without pinning and hope for the best. I've got everything laid out over here on my design board. I need to sew this seam. When I don't pin, I'll sit down at the machine, take a moment, lay it out, and I'll check things like that seam here and the point here, fold it up, and kind of hold it with my fingers and turn it. And then I'll go ahead and sew, and I'll keep an eye on that right there so I don't lose my point. Let's have a look at all of these. And just if anybody's curious, the reason I got so far behind is we had a few last minute things going on here with the room and the yard. The construction playlist will be linked below if you want to see what's going on. And my husband and I are also caretakers for 40-something animals. We're under 50 at this point, and we had a couple animal emergencies. Sometimes things come up, so I'm doing my best to get all caught up. That looks pretty good. It doesn't quite meet. You see I've got a little bit of a gap right there. If you want it to be perfect, it would kind of be more like that, but that looks good. It's lined up with the fold right there. Let's look at the other two. This one doesn't matter, and I didn't run over the point, so that's good. And let's look at this one. That one's a little off. Do you see how the point is slightly below the seam line? I'm not ripping that out. It's fine. You can actually see here, this fabric is a little bit lower, and then down here, see that? It's a little bit off. It doesn't bother me. I'm going to go ahead and press these. Here's our pressing guide for this. For the top row and the bottom row, we're pressing in toward the rectangle. And for the center row, you want to press out toward the rectangles. When we put our rows together, everything will nest. Do you see what I did? This is what happens when you sew without pinning and you're really tired. I need to seam rip that and flip that around. These are fine. These are fine. Remember the dark rectangle is on the outside. I did that one backwards. I'm going to redo that. That's better. Now all my darks are on the outside. I have a couple more things to sew. and then we'll have our rows, and then we'll sew the rows together. I'll do the same thing for these. I'm going to double check everything this time. I've got the 3 rows. Double check your layout again. Make sure you don't accidentally do this. It doesn't look bad, it's just different. But we want to make sure that dark rectangle is on the outside. When we go to put the rows together, these seams are going to nest, and we've talked about that before. You can kind of slide them and they'll lock, and you've got your point here to watch and the seam right here on the rectangle, and same thing over here, the point and the seam. So if you want to pin, I would say pin the seam here, here, and then this point here and this point here. And you'll sew that and press, and they have us pressing this way, away from the center. Same thing here. You can pin here, 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 and here. Sew and press that out. I'm going to be a bad example of quilting today and be really lazy and not pin everything, and let's see what happens. I've got everything laid out next to me. I'm going to double check my layout, make sure I've got that dark on the outside, and I'm going to lock the seam and I'm going to hold it. Let's see how I did without pins. That came out really good. That's nice and lined up. I didn't lose the point. But this seam is off. See how I didn't quite get that lined up right? The seam is over here instead of over here. I'm not unpicking it. It's the same background fabric. Same here. I didn't quite get that nested all the way over. But my points are lined up really nice. Let's go ahead and do the next part. See if I can get those seams a little bit better. Something else when you're sewing a block like this, we've got the square and a square here, and then you also have the center square and a square. So if you're watching your intersections, you can't see this one because it's down here. I can see I didn't get it perfect. You can kind of feel for it or pin. If you want that super accuracy, pin it. It'll come out better. Let's have a look. This lined up really nice this time. This one's really off, but that's all right. Here's my square and a square and the rectangle and the square and a square and a rectangle. It's actually not that bad. I'm going to go ahead and press this according to the instructions, which is pressing out away from the center square and a square, and we'll get the ruler, we'll measure it and see how I did. It looks pretty good. Moment of truth though is getting the ruler. I'm going to line it up along the edge, along that edge. I can cut off this little bit that sticks up. This is actually pretty good there. It's pretty good along the top. Let me see. I can clean up a little bit right here. This side is really crooked. Do you see that? It kind of lines up here. It's really short there in the center, and then it kind of lines up down here, like up here. This is going to be really easy to see when I go to sew that into the quilt. In fact, I might be able to press that out a little bit better and make that lie a little bit more flat, but that's easy to see. I don't have to worry about marking that. I'm going to clean this up, sew the 6-inch block, and I'll show you both blocks. I've got this all cleaned up. I just wanted to show that's all I trimmed off of all 4 sides. Just a little bit, just to make it a little bit neater. It's still not perfectly square, but it's easy to see where the short piece is. Let's move that out of the way. My 6-inch block, which is 6.5 inches unfinished, came out really good. It's almost perfectly square, except it's 6.25 inches square, which goes along with the way it's been going. All my blocks usually come out short. Isn't that pretty? I love the colors on this. I like the way that the background on the 9-inch looks with the low volume print. This is nice instead of a solid. And then because this fabric line, this is the Strawberry Lemonade, has so many bright colors and florals, it looks really good with the solid white in the background. I hope you've enjoyed stitching block number 13, the back porch block, with me. I'll be back next week for block number 14. I should have that one up on time. I aim to get them up by Saturday the latest. This week things just got a little bit crazy. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them below the video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.